In any group of normal children, there is an expectation of mental ill health which bears comparison with that of adult populations. About 1% are destined to become severely maladjusted, 2% delinquent, 10% educationally subnormal, and up to 30% disturbed to the extent of requiring psychiatric guidance. Among children admitted to hospital for psychiatric reasons, all forms of disturbed behavior are exaggerated. Yet, in spite of this, they can be observed playing together and making friends. Very occasionally, among such severely disturbed children, a child may be seen quite out of touch with the rest of the group, living apparently in a world of its own. This is a psychotic child. We are now going to tell you the life story of Margaret, who developed a psychotic illness early in her childhood. In most cases, when a child is brought to the clinic, we have to rely on mother's faulty memory for the early history, but with Margaret, we have at our disposal 3 reliable contemporary sources of information: a family photographic album, a detailed diary, and a moving picture record. All these were intended to depict her general development, but became, with the sad turn of events, an accurate commentary on the unfolding of a psychosis. Margaret's family live in a country town not far from London. They occupy a small semi-detached council house in a quiet neighborhood. Their lives are centered around the local church to which they belong. Her father is an experimental engineer, shy and asociable. He spends his time on scientific research dealing with space travel and is also an amateur photographer. Mother is uncertain of herself and unduly anxious to please. As a child, she was left out of children's groups owing to her timidity and lack of push. She felt that having children of her own would compensate for this past isolation. On neither side of the family is there any history of mental illness. Father's camera gave Margaret a much photographed infancy. She was the first of 3 children to enter the family album. Pregnancy and birth were uneventful. She was given the breast for 5 months, but was difficult to feed since she tended to fall asleep. But she was cuddlesome and smilingly responsive. At 5 months, Father's work took him to Canada, and Mother kept a diary of Margaret's progress for his benefit.
Margaret's now 5 months old and thriving. She's very good and hardly ever soils a nappy. Buster's bark always scares her and makes her cry as if in pain. In the bath she splashes like a baby mermaid. She's really very sweet-tempered and smiles beautifully at everyone. She recognizes faces in magazines and is tremendously attracted to brightly colored things. She sings in time to music and uses little syllables. We are, however, having trouble with her feeding. With any unexpected sight or sound, she brings up all her food. It seems to be a nervous complaint.
Father returned from Canada after 6 months with a cine camera and began to film her regularly. His first film showed her preoccupation with things. She was always investigating and pulling them apart. She was now taking her food well, watched anxiously by her mother, who was easily upset by minor setbacks. She seemed overzealous to make a success of Margaret. At 16 months, she went to stay with her grandparents, with whom she was rather unhappy. But she still appeared a very normal child, as energetic and acrobatic as her years would allow her to be, and ready to complain of little bumps and bruises. She was happiest at the seaside and loved playing in the water. It was sometimes difficult to get her to come out of it. The family dog still frightened her when he barked, but gradually, under Mother's tuition, she learnt to pet him. At 2.5, she wasn't talking as much as before, and spent a lot of time standing aimlessly about. At 3, she reacted badly to the birth of the next baby. At a time when she needed them most, her parents were preoccupied with the newcomer. Despite their encouragement, she showed little genuine affection for her brother. A marked difference in her behavior now became apparent. She stopped being cheerful and developed a host of fears. These were sometimes so intense that her legs folded up under her, and her whole body, as her mother put it, resembled a person in a nightmare. These attacks of terror were accompanied by wild, uncontrollable screaming. Gradually she became less interested in people and more absorbed in herself and her own activities. She constantly complained about bricks in the eyes and would rub them persistently, although there was little evidence of there being anything the matter with them. She took little notice of her brother, but would imitate many of the movements that he made, once he was able to get on his feet. Although she screamed a great deal for no apparent reason, she seldom complained of hurt, and gave very little expression of pain. Even during this turbulent period, in her own setting at home, she looked like a normal 4-year-old child, but the changes at work inside her were soon to become external and obvious. The turbulence rapidly subsided, and the fearfulness and screaming gave place to withdrawn and rigid behavior. She now began to look queer in addition to behaving queerly, and her speech became uncommunicative and parrot-like. Over and over again she would repeat the same phrases. "What's the matter with you?" "Don't scream." "No one's frightening you, darling." "You mustn't tear the pictures." "She's not really bad." "Maggie, you're a bad girl." "Don't beat Maggie," and so on. She seemed to resent any close contact and would shake herself free from it. Under conditions of excitement, like many psychotic children, she made flapping movements. Another visit to the seaside brought out these new bizarre qualities. She was now immersed in her own world, and no longer appeared to be, as her parents put it, a real person. The life had gone out of her. This striking change from an energetic, interested, and extremely happy child into an unresponsive automaton who never smiled at all also showed up clearly in the pages of the family album. She made life so difficult for the family that she was sent away to a special school. She became too disturbed for them to manage and was admitted at the age of 11 to the Maudsley Hospital. At her first appearance there, her stiff and clumsy gait was at once noticeable, together with her general emotional flatness and odd mannerisms. Her daily round is simple and variable, depending on chance encounters with her environment. She stumbles by accident on some pleasurable activity and keeps to it for as long as she is left alone. The sheer physical action of blowing soap bubbles, stirring the soap solution, or licking the soapy tube fills her with a tremulous excitement. If interfered with at all in her enjoyment, she tends to respond not with anger, but with a vague, hapless type of behavior, something intermediate between fight and flight. Her feelings are then displaced into some irrelevant activity, like spitting and smearing the spit. When things that she desires are beyond her reach, she makes use of adults around her as tools to achieve her purpose, but without in any way forming a relationship with them. She makes no friends and is uncomfortable and evasive when approached in a friendly way by other children, who often react in a very positive way to her helplessness. She is unable to walk, talk, play, or even fight with them, turning instead to the less demanding, inanimate objects. From time to time, in the ward or playground, she can be coaxed to join in group activities. These represent her only contact with other children during the course of the day. She is able only to cooperate in such games when they can give her the sensations which she craves. She looks most pleased when jumping or swinging, and is quick to learn the simple sensory-motor rules involved. Her isolation in a group and preoccupation with her own needs can be observed when the children are having a meal together. She will go through the motions of response as when saying grace, but it is only an incomprehensible mumble. She will allow others to help her, but shows not a trace of gratitude. She complies with the social demand, however, and eats with a fork or spoon, but outside the set meals and on her own, she uses her hands. She eats fairly skillfully off a plate, but is equally prepared to eat off the ground. There is an animal relish to her eating, and at times her whole body shares in it. Odd facial mannerisms also tend to make their appearance at this time. Between courses, if there is any delay, she will get up and pace the room restlessly. At the end of a course, again conforming like the other children, she will offer her empty plate to be taken away and receive a new one. Removing her plate before she is finished occasions her no surprise. Surprise is, in fact, an emotion rarely seen in these psychotic children. In the classroom, her random behavior in a roomful of well-occupied children is a striking phenomenon. She will weave a solitary passage through the busy room without so much as a glance at anyone, and without any obvious aim except to find for herself some unoccupied corner, preferably near a radiator, and as far from human contact as possible. Objects are of value only when they can be drummed against the surface or put into the mouth. At times she can be induced to turn the pages of a book or magazine, but not to look at them. Concepts and symbols appear to play no part in her life, and she is able to learn only on a sensory-motor level. Every now and then she spends a weekend at home, disrupting its quiet. In the ordinary way, Voices are seldom raised in this household, but with Margaret's coming, the youngest child is apt to show a mixture of suspicion and resentment. In the handling of the children, the parents manifest an intolerance of aggressive and impolite behavior. As long as the children are quietly occupied with reading or constructing, they are kind and encouraging, but with any dissension they become immediately tense. In spite of her gentleness, Mother is unable to establish a comfortable and secure relationship with her children. She is constantly perplexed by their behavior, and her movements towards them are lacking in sensitivity. Father is kind and considerate in his handling of Margaret, but her difficulties in making and tolerating physical contact are exaggerated by his stiffness. Mother's determination to make normal contact with Margaret is apt to drive her further and further into her autism. Her great pleasure at home lies in the garden, which affords her endless possibilities for retreat. Behind some bush she can often be heard singing wordless melodies with magnificent tunefulness. Father's main complaint is that she picks his flowers. Under his guidance she has learned to ride a tricycle. Water holds a special fascination for her, as do all so-called primitive materials. With the watering can to play with, she once again shows the tremulous excitement that goes with her experience of pleasant physical sensations. In this state, she will also drum out a complex rhythm and mumble inarticulately. Like many siblings of psychotic children, her brother seems deeply involved in her strange predicament, and will often force his contact on her to the point at which a normal child might reasonably get exasperated. Although she shakes him off, she takes his teasing with apparent good humor, and he can often provoke her to laugh in a happy, spontaneous way. His relationship with her is the nearest thing to a normal one that she is able to make. Where is this unfortunate girl to end? The child who started life with such energy and impetus is now drifting into an apathetic and pointless existence. There is some therapeutic and research provision made for her until the age of 12, but at adolescence she becomes the Cinderella of psychiatry. Very few want the psychotic child at this age. She is not considered suitable for the low-grade institutions and is still too young for the mental hospitals. But these are the places to which she is sooner or later compelled to go, to be lost eventually among the defectives and adult psychotics. With the mental health organization at our disposal, we must recognize her special problem and the challenge she presents.